Okay, welcome everyone. We'd like to get the meeting started of the Delta Independent Science Board, and let's first have our introductions and declarations, and I'll just go around first to the folks on the phone. Joy?
Joy Ribner, no changes.
John?
John Weems, no changes.
Liz?
Liz Kenuel, no changes.
And Joe, are you there? Okay, we'll go around the room here. Tracy?
Tracy Collier, no changes.
Jay Lund, no changes.
Steve Brandt, no changes.
Vince Resch, no changes.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. And today we're really happy to be at the Big Break Visitor Center for our meeting today. And I'd like to ask Rachel to come out and give us a little introduction of where we're at and why we're here.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Rachel Polizzi. I am acting naturalist right now, and I'm filling in for Mike Moran today, and I'm happy to be here with you all to give you a quick introduction of our park district and this visitor center, and then our goal of the visitor center is also listed behind you on the wall, but I'll be going over that. So first off, you came out to Contra Costa County. You are in East Bay Regional Park District. We are a two-county agency. Alameda and Contra Costa County residents fund this agency, and it was actually created in 1934 because of water. And basically East Bay residents realized they needed more water, and they started changing their water source to the McCollum River to provide water to Oakland. And when that happened, they realized they're going to have more land for sale, and so they sell the land to build homes, or so they tax themselves to basically preserve the land. And that's what how the park district started. It was actually started because of water. So it's really fitting that that's why we're here today. And we have 73 parks and 120,000 acres of parklands, 1,200 miles of trails. So there's a lot to do out here in the park district. We have 7 visitor centers like this, but this is the newest one in 20 years. And when they were trying to decide where should we build a visitor center and what should the visitor center be about, we were pretty lucky that they picked the Delta. Out of all the topics out there, all those resources, Big Break, this location was selected, but I think even more important, the Delta was selected as a topic to talk about. So our goal as a park district has missions, has visions, and when you build a visitor center, you have to have statements of goals of where you're going and what you're going to teach about. So what's really cool about our vision is actually, instead of being statements, it's questions. I just went to the Bay Delta Science Conference, and I learned a lot. There's a lot of statements that are being presented and facts and a lot of science. But at the end of the day, what I learned is that it's all about communicating and talking about the science and sharing the science and learning from each other. And the more we're thinking about it and asking more questions, the more we're going to learn. So that's our goal, is to help people learn by walking away with more questions versus statements. I know it's really opposite, but we're hoping that's going to help in the long run, is leaving people here thinking about what else should I go learn about now, because the Delta is so complex and there's so much to study. So our guiding questions behind you is, what is the Delta? It's a landform. It's where water flows through. But the Delta, to me, is very different to other people in the audience. The Delta is my playground. I swam in the Delta as a 5-year-old child. So we're trying to teach that what you may think is the Delta to you may be different to someone else, and trying to realize it's more than just one perspective. Why is the Delta important to me? And the big parentheses there, all Californians. That's the hard part, because most people that walk into a visitor center come in with their own agenda, and to help expand that view is our goal. We also want to explain why is it important to wildlife. For that, we offer a lot of programs. We serve 40,000 people a year here in this visitor center, and 10,000 are students. So I help lead programs for kids that come in this room, and we go out in the park and we're learning about all the wildlife. We're doing water testing and looking at the macro invertebrates. So I'm trying to get them excited about the wildlife that lives here. And then we also talk about how has it changed over time. And we all know in this room how much has changed. So when I grew up here, I didn't know that the levees were a marshland. And that's just because you just look at the levees and you think they're always there. So by coming in and learning and teaching and having conversations about change, because it's changed through time and it's going to continue to change through time. And this is my favorite. What is wrong with the Delta? That's actually part of our goal here with the visitor center, is having people ask those questions from as many perspectives as possible. Because what I think may be wrong with the Delta is going to be completely different from someone that's a peach farmer or a salmon fisher or someone that's living in LA versus in Trinity. So everybody has different perspectives on what they think is wrong. And the more you can learn about someone else's perspective, the more you can have conversation. And that's what we're trying to go with. The last thing is, how can you help the Delta? So as we leave this visitor center and you leave this park today, our goal is that the more you learn, the more you share, the more you can help. So that's our overall reason why we're in existence, why I work here, is to do that. And the last thing I was going to leave you with is a little park history of why Big Break got their name. So Big Break is along the San Joaquin River, and then it became a farmland in the 1800s. We farmed, I didn't farm, but it was farmed, asparagus was farmed out there. And then in 1927, big break in the levee, right? And the news spread, there was a big break, and that's how the name was stuck. And if you go out there today, you're gonna see a big map on the ground, and you can see the big break that's still out there. It's only 5 feet deep, shallow water. And if you kayak for about 20 minutes, you hit the San Joaquin River. So it's pretty special. We just did a kayaking program this morning for seniors out of Antioch. I do programs for preschool to college students. We do research projects out here. It's really just a place to get out here, observe, learn, and get to know the land and ask a lot of questions so that hopefully we can all share our knowledge in the future. Thank you so much for coming here today, and we're very excited to have you. And if you have any questions throughout your visit, I'm here to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, I guess we'll move on to the number 3 item on the list, which is the chair's report. Well, this morning we had a field trip, and field trips are really an important part of what we think the Delta Independent Science does. It gives us an opportunity to get out and actually get our feet wet, or at least get on the ground of the Delta, see all the various things that we talk about and read about, and get to talk to a number of individuals who are actually doing on-the-ground things. And we think that sort of provides us with sort of a sense of reality of the kind of reviews we write and so forth, to actually feel and get a sense of the Delta, particularly for us who don't live in the region. This morning we visited Twitchell Island all morning, and we talked a lot about subsistence and levees, rice fields, and wetlands, carbon credits, and even mosquito fish. And I did want to thank in particular our 3 people who presented this information and discussed it with us, and that's Brian Brock from DWR, Steve Deverell from Hydrofocus, and Campbell Ingram from the Delta Conservancy. It was very informative. We learned a lot, and we had perfect weather for it. Does anyone else want to add anything about our field trip?
I'll add. So Tom was asking about publications that have come from there, and there are a number. There's a couple on subsidence and accretion rates, as well as some of the more recent work on the gas fluxes. So I'll send you some of those references if you're interested.
Jay, did you?
I thought it was a very useful field trip. Particularly the discussions about land subsidence and subsidence, maybe not either reversal or reduction, cessation, depending upon how well things go. But also the possibility of converting some of the lower valued agriculture in subsided areas to wetlands, and then trying to get, in addition to sort of carbon benefits from that change in land use, but perhaps also getting some hunting and recreational benefits as well.
Okay, the next item I have is, I think everyone realizes that Darcy Austin has left the Delta Science program and moved over to the state water contractors, and Darcy has really been the ISB program manager for the last few years, and she's always here and keeps a overview of what we do. She's been very valuable to us, and I know we're all going to miss her. Those who were at the Bay Delta Conference to get a chance to chat with her and give us our individual thanks, but she will be missed from this program, so just wanted to say that. As part of the, at the Bay Delta Science Conference last week, there are some of our summary sheets that Delta has placed. The restoration summary sheet were available at the Delta Science Program, or Delta Council, I guess, table. Our water quality review was out there. The adaptive management, copies of the adaptive management article were there, and they were distributed and available at the Bay Delta Conference. We'll talk more about the Bay Delta Conference as we go through. The rest of the agenda is just walk through it briefly. We'll have a council report given by John Calloway, and then the Delta Lead Science reports, and then we'll have updates on our various reviews. We'll spend some time talking about the ecosystem prospectus, which we have a sort of an action item to see if we want to pass that as is and finalize it. We'll have some reflections on the Bay Delta Science Conference, and then talk about some of our upcoming meetings. For members of the public, if anyone wants to have a public comment on any of our items, I'm reminded to tell you that there's blue sheets back there to fill out to make your public comments. So I think that's all that I have. I'm looking at Edmund, and we'll go on with the council report given by John Calloway.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So most of you got to see Randy Fiorini and Jessica Pearson at the conference. Unfortunately, they were both busy today and couldn't be here for the meeting. But they asked me to present a couple of items on their behalf. The first is just to update you on the last council meeting, where the ecosystem amendment was actually the main focus of discussion for the council. They spent about 2 hours or 3 hours discussing the ecosystem amendment, and that was the first really intensive meeting that the council has had. So it was an opportunity to update them on the scope of the proposed changes to the ecosystem chapter, and to begin to get into some of the ideas and an initial discussion around some of the potential changes to policies or recommendations that will be in the ecosystem amendment. So there is a item, there's the summary sheet in your materials there that highlights what was presented there. There was a panel presentation. Letitia Grenier from SFEI gave an overview of the work that SFEI's been doing on the Delta that's set sort of the scope for part of the ecosystem amendment. Garrett Plattenkamp from ESA and Stuart Seago also presented. And then Kristen DeBala and Brooke Jacobs presented around some of the current current initiatives that are going forward with some of the other agencies that are of interest for the ecosystem amendment. And then Jessica Law and Ron Meltzer sort of coordinated the discussion. The hope was to get into more discussion around the proposed the proposed policy and recommendations that will be in the chapter, but actually there was so much interest in the early component of just the scope of the chapter that was put off, and that will be on the next council meeting later this month. So any questions? Okay, and then the other item for the council is on the agenda for the September meeting for the council is the last. I think you all know that there's been a series of discussions at the council on data to decision making, starting actually Steve Culberson talked about data collection. George Isaacs, who's here, led a discussion around data management issues. There was a discussion around the CSAM, what the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program is doing in the Delta. And so the last discussion of that will be at the council meeting in September. There's a panel on governance issues for the science program and how that relates to other science governance efforts that are currently going forward. So I'll participate in that panel to talk about the science programs governance. Mark Lubell from UC Davis, whose expertise is in that area, will be there just to talk about governance issues in general. And then Deborah Halberstadt, who's at the Ocean Protection Council, and Liz Whiteman, who's at the Ocean Science Trust. We'll talk about the arrangement that they have where the Ocean Protection Council is a government agency and the Ocean Science Trust is a companion organization, but a separate organization and set up as a nonprofit, and how that works for them, thinking about how the science programs governance, not that that's the perfect model, but to discuss a range of models so that we could think about those governance issues.
John, on that discussion at the council meeting, is that in any way, is that arising from the blog from Jeff Mount and the continuing that discussion when I came down and talked to DPIC?
It definitely is, because yes,
Okay.
So Tracy was on a discussion with DPIC along with Mark Lubell to discuss governance issues in general. So the blog certainly will be part of the discussion. That's not the entire focus, but that will be one piece of it. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, any public comment on this? All right, John?
So now I get to change hats and
Yep,
talk
change
to you
hats.
guys about lead scientist issues. Okay, so the first item for the lead scientist is that the Delta Science Plan, the public draft is out, and public comments are due by September 20th. So anyone who's here or who's listening, I encourage you, if you'd like to provide, we'd like to get your public comments. So those are due by September 20th. And if you look at the science plan or the science program's webpage, you can get information there. After staff has a chance to review those comments and revise, then we will provide a draft to the ISB for your formal input and review, and that will probably be October or November. So we'll update you about when exactly that will be out, and then we'll ask for your comments. I think we're going to give you 60 days to give us feedback, and then the hope is that then we'll have a draft out early 2019. The original focus was to have it out by the end of the year, but we're about a month behind schedule currently, and given all the other things we're working on, early 2019 is definitely a fine time to have it out.
It's my understanding that you might be giving us a presentation on that at November meeting?
Yes. So Yumi Henneberry, who's been leading that initiative, will be here and will give a presentation. At our meeting. At your meeting, at the meeting in November.
Telecom, probably.
Yeah, in November.
And I don't know how we've done this in the past, but we probably, as a board, need to figure out exactly how we're going to handle that review and who might take the lead on that and what group we might have.
Yeah, so I'm not certain if we will have it to you exactly early November or if it'll be a little bit later, but we'll be able to give you an overview in early November, and then either you'll have it then or get it right after that.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure, Steve, that anytime we've reviewed the science plan in the past, it's always been the chair of the ISB that took the lead.
I had heard that it was past
chairs.
chairs as a team.
Distant past, yeah.
Okay, another item just to update is that we do have a symposium coming up later this month, September 26th. That's a joint symposium with UC Davis on salinization issues, and it definitely has a link to salinity issues here in the Delta, but it is also slightly broader. It's looking at impacts of salinity on physiology and evolutionary issues, so it's a broad, a range of topics. The The final program is not yet available, but as soon as it is available, we'll send it out. And it will, like other conferences, it will be available remotely, so I'd encourage you if you're interested. September 26th on salinization issues. The science program and the CDFW's joint proposal solicitation notice came out earlier this week. And so we have $12 million of funding available for research in the Delta, with funding from CDFW, the science program, and the Bureau of Reclamation. And I would encourage you, we will send you out the notice if you haven't already received it. It just went out on our webpage, to our distribution list, I think last night or yesterday. And I would encourage you to send that on to your colleagues. We'd like to get as many proposals as possible. Proposals are due October 26th, so 6 weeks from tomorrow. And any questions on any of those items, or especially the PSN? Okay, and then I want to mention, in addition to the science conference being this week, 2 weeks ago, a number of us were in New Orleans at the National Conference on Ecosystem Restoration. And Edmund was there, Darcy was there, Maggie Christman, Jessica Law, and myself. And the plenary there was a focus on Gulf Coast restoration. It was an all-day plenary with 4 different panels looking at, and it was patterned explicitly on the Science Enterprise Workshop, trying to take that model of how can we learn from other systems and apply that to issues on our local system. So the idea was to get a range, many of the same systems, Puget Sound, Chesapeake, the Sacramento Delta, Everglades, and to discuss what our issues are on a wide range of issues: performance measures, just actual approaches, funding, governance. And it was, the plenary, I think, was very successful. Peter Goodwin also presented as one of the plenaries another day and really featured the what lessons from the Delta. Edmund presented on the use of independent reviews, and he featured the Independent Science Board and the role that the Independent Science Board and the contributions that the Science Board makes towards science here in the Delta. I think his presentation was very well done and well received. Darcy led a panel on restoration. Actually, Campbell Ingram, who was here on the tour this morning, was part of that panel, focusing on the opportunities for restoration around eco-restore in the Delta. And Maggie presented on science communication and using communication to address adaptive management issues. I participated in one of the plenaries, and then also presented. Reiner was going to present but couldn't go, so I presented a presentation for Reiner on lessons around setting flow standards and flow issues from the Delta. So I think it was a great conference, and really lots of, although the lessons were focused on the Gulf Coast, lots for us to learn as well. So good networking opportunity for all the staff. And then I'll finish. Question?
Are the presentations available as PDFs or anything? Are they posted?
The presentations will be posted, and actually most of them were recorded and are going to be available as sort of WebEx, with the slides and the.
And you'll let us know when those come
yeah,
out.
so
Thank you.
I can send that out. If you'd like to see any of the individual science program presentations, we can send out the PDFs, I think, of the presentations to you. Any other questions on ENSER? Okay, and then, so then there's 2 articles that I presented to the council that I'll just very briefly mention, and that I'll send out to you. One is physical and biological responses to flow in tidal freshwater slough, in a tidal freshwater slough complex by Jared Franzich, and maybe some of you saw his presentation at the science conference. He gave an overview of this work and more recent work that they've been doing in the Yolo bypass, looking at the effects, the increased productivity in the Yolo bypass because of longer residence time and warmer temperatures, and the link that has to secondary production for zooplankton. And this paper that's in SFUSE summarizes work that they did from 2011 to 2014 in the bypass. And it's definitely very relevant, especially because just right now, this summer and fall, they're doing some similar flow experiments to see if that's was a fluke of previous years or is something that's more predictably consistent in the bypass. And then the second paper is on survival of juvenile fall-run Chinook salmon through the San Joaquin River Delta from 2010 to 2015 by Rebecca Buchanan and Pat Brandis and John Skalski. That was in the North American Journal of Fisheries Management. And they did acoustic tagging and looked at survival rates of fish on the San Joaquin. They found unbelievably low survival rates. 5% was a high survival rate. The highest survival rate was for fish that were caught in the pumps and salvaged and trucked past the delta and released. Actually, just if we had had time, we would have gone out to Sherman Island to see where the release site was. But yeah, we went right near there. So that was the highest survival, fish that swam through, and they looked at a variety of pathways. One important thing they found was that most of those years were relatively low flow, but 2011 was a relatively high flow year, and even in a high flow year, survival was low. So they made the case that flow is important, but flow without some habitat or some other improvements is not going to improve that. So I'll send you those two papers. I think they're both.
John, did they make any management recommendations?
Their management recommendations were improve habitat and improve flow combined.
Not more pumps.
No, they didn't say keep relying on salvage to support the population. Not a sustainable.
They weren't recommending a bigger salvage
No,
facility.
they were not. Okay, those are all my topics. Any other questions?
Any questions on the phone for John? Any public comments? Okay, we'll move on to item number 6, which is getting into status reports on our reviews. I'll first mention the fish and flows, which I forgot to mention earlier, summary sheet we're working on. Kat put together a very comprehensive first draft of that that's been some commented on. She's working on the second draft, and my guess is the final should be done shortly. So with that, we'll move on to water quality. Tracy?
So yesterday, I made the presentation at the Bay Delta Science Conference on the water quality review. As I started off, I said it's always fun to come to a science conference and talk about process and findings and recommendations, but that's what we did. It seemed to be pretty well received, I would say. I got a fair number of questions from the audience afterwards, and some people stopped me on the way out and wanted to know if they could talk further about it. Randy, again, came in to listen to that, and afterwards he commented specifically that he really liked the format of presenting a finding and then a specific recommendation to go with that finding. He found that to be very persuasive when we did that for the council. And so we talked about that a little bit last night, that we may try to structure a lot of our reviews more that way. We've been going that way, but this was the one I think where we were the most specific in doing that. Edmund pointed out to us about a month ago or so that the water quality review of the thematic reviews that we've done is already the most downloaded of the reviews we've done. When I gave my presentation yesterday, I said yes, but I've got about 52 copies on my computer, so it couldn't come from that. So overall, though, I thought the presentation went well. One person stopped me on the way out and wanted to know if it was too late to find a way for me to present that at the CTAC meeting that's going to be in San Francisco in November. And I said, we're actually already doing that. We're already on the program. So he was real pleased about that. So that was the Bay Delta Science presentation. We also met on August 20th with John and a few people from the science program at Randy's request after the council meeting. Specifically, he said, what can we do? He asked John, what can we do to start to implement some of these recommendations? Are there any that we can deal with? So what we decided was that in the near term, some of the recommendations can be used for guiding funding proposals, and in the RFP that John talked about that went out, it went out yesterday, right, John, I think? Yeah, okay. The announcement came out for some reason yesterday. Okay. Okay. So anyway, so I pointed out in the presentation that some of the prioritization that was in that RFP actually were changed as a result of the review. So there were some updates there. So it's already being productive. And we've also talked about that we could use the findings in the review to potentially update the Delta Plan Water Quality chapter the next time that comes up. And then we've decided provisionally that in January of next year, we'll have a panel discussion on moving forward with water quality recommendations more broadly than just what the Delta Science Program can do, but what can be done by other people as well. We also have been working on the one-pager for the water quality review. Vince put together a draft. Liz has provided some comments. We're working on it. I've read it all, but haven't really weighed in yet, but we'll, hopefully at our next meeting, we'll come to you with a somewhat of a draft of the water quality one-page outreach. And then I already talked about the CTAC meeting in November. We'll be doing outreach there. And again, that session at CTAC is going to be, there's a session on multiple stressors, and it's going to focus on delta issues and multiple stressors. So I think the water quality review and our emphasis on water quality parameters as one of many stressors that can affect overall ecosystem resilience and impacts, hopefully will be well received there. Vince or Liz, anything you want to add?
No, you did a great job summarizing.
That's because Edmund and Kat and others wrote up for me a little list of all the things I was supposed to talk about. So otherwise I would have fumbled around. So it was great. Thanks, you guys.
Okay, let's move on to water supply reliability.
Water supply reliability, no real changes since last time, except I'm working on a questionnaire right now, and I'll have one by the end of today. Draft to start moving things along.
Okay, any questions on Vince?
Jay, what list are you? Sorry, what list are you going to send that out to? Is there a listserv that you'd be able to tap into? Because that really helped us with the IEP.
I've got a list of organizations and some individuals to send this to, but we could also send it out on the QEMF listserv, the California Water Environment Modeling Forum website. Listserv that would get to a lot of them as well. Good idea.
And the workshop in January is pretty much a lock-in?
I think so. I think once we get this.
So it's firm. This is Joe. Is it firm that January 10th?
Whatever the date is in January, I think that's what we should.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's what we should do.
Okay.
So the thought is that
Yes, the 10th.
we would send this questionnaire out hopefully early in October, and then mid-October start inviting people. We already have a rough agenda for it.
Okay, welcome, Joe. Do you have any new declarations?
No new declaration. Sorry, I was a little late. I'm far away. So sorry.
We know you're in Canada, I think, right?
Yeah, it's a Newfoundland. It's a kind of a faraway place called Fairyland. So, but anyway, sorry. There's no new declarations.
Okay, thanks. The next one is IEP. Vince?
Yes, thank you, Steve. Since last meeting when we presented an update, we've had 2 conference calls about the status and where we're advancing and new things to come up. And basically, we're continuing to summarize and bin information from previous IEP reviews, from the interviews that we had with the 27 people, and we're making good progress on that, and we hope within a couple of weeks we will have that completely done. And likewise, we're continuing to do that concurrently with the brown bag seminars that we had on and the panels that were about the IEP. So we will be doing those in parallel. I mentioned last time that we have a draft write-up on the questionnaire responses that, again, that was very, very successful because we had a large listserv that we could send out to. We've had a couple of internal reviewers at this table, Kat and Edmund, that have made comments, and they've been incorporated into that draft. We had looked into some of the literature on team science and organizational theory, and we will have some inclusion in that, but it will not be a big part of our review because of just the way IEP has been structured over the years. We've received written comments. I've mentioned that. I want to thank Kat for modifying the graphs and making them much more readable for the questionnaire, and that unfortunately she'll be leaving in the middle of, well, hopefully we can push it to the middle, but sometime in 2019, and she will be leaving the files for us to modify further. We do have the issue about people wanting the questionnaire results, and we've gotten input that I've passed on to Steve, and we'll make some type of decision on the executive part of the DISB today as to what we should do, because I think consistency is a big issue that has been brought up. And we have decided, you know, we're looking at to see if there was a conceptual framework or conceptual model of how the IEP works, and we've looked at one. A couple of people have said, well, you know, you should try to maybe put one together, but they're very discouraging about just how we go about doing this, and we've decided that we will identify that as a major need of the IEP. We are making progress. You know, we don't have a date yet for a complete draft, but we are working on it, and the subgroup has assignments ready to go, and long plane flights to do some binning on. So we are making progress.
So do we have a year for a first draft for us?
Oh, before that.
So this year sometime?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. I mean, we have the questionnaire drafted. What I think we were talking about in the last conference call, the one today, is that we have, you know, these three independent or semi-independent, you know, the interviews that we did with the IEP people, the questionnaire that went out to the listserv, and then the brown bag seminars, that we probably will have individual draft sections on that, and then try to synthesize those in terms of coming up with concrete recommendations and findings and things like that. Yeah, so I think we're making reasonable progress.
Great. Any questions?
Tracy or Liz, do you want to add anything to that? Dick, do you want to add anything?
Any questions from people on the phone? Okay, Vince, I think you have the next one too, monitoring enterprise.
Yeah, yes, this is, you know, we don't have much to report. We're waiting for the RFP to close, which will be October 4th. Unfortunately, Leslie Carey, who was a great help in the last one and is very, very knowledgeable, has retired. So I don't know if there's an update, Edmund, as to who's going to take his place yet, or?
Not yet.
Okay.
But Jessica Olson, whose existing staff is and was overseeing Les, is agreed to help make sure that moves forward. So
Okay,
I think
right.
we have good support.
Yeah, so that we hope to have a contractor in place by December of this year. The staff members that are helped with the brown bag summaries are finishing those up, and we're, you know, anticipating that that's going to be a big help as well. So, you know, we've had a big delay when the RFP didn't work the first time, so I think that's been one of the issues that slowed us down. But you know, we have a lot of progress on the questionnaire. Has been done. It's been modified. Tom made some good suggestions, so we're ready to, once we get a contractor to work with, and then I think Steve, the board that will do the evaluation has been set, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And we had a conference call for potential applicants with
Yes.
Les.
Oh, you want to talk about that, John?
Les, myself, and Jessica had a call, and I think we had 6 potential leads that participated in the call.
And follow up with John is if it goes according to plan, when the reviews are scheduled, I think for October 12th and 16th, when would be the earliest one that would expect the contract to be let?
I think the plan is that it would be by the end of October, we would have identified the contractor and work on negotiations to finalize the contract, so that they would be under contract sometime in November, before the end of the year for sure.
Because I know as part of that process is for them to meet early on with either our work group, probably our work group versus the full board, and I'm just wondering, is it too soon to start thinking about doing that in December, if we meet in December?
So the next meeting is November and then January?
Probably
Yeah.
December.
Oh, December? So if it's December, it could be that we could do that in December.
It might be a little tight because I think December 8th is what we have tentatively targeting, or like around December, like late end of December, like that week that we may be having our teleconference. But we could do January, or schedule a call or something like that.
But what we could also do is have the subgroup come in a morning earlier to meet with the contractor and just start that.
Right.
Is that would be possible in December?
Yes, but hopeful that we get a contractor first, because we made big plans last time and everything fell apart.
Edmund, what could go wrong? I mean, really?
Okay, any questions on that? All right, we have one public comment. Tom Zuckerman? Ask those guys.
What I have to say relates possibly to both items 6 and 7 on your agenda, but I'll start now, and if you think it'd be more appropriate to stop and wait, I'll be happy to do so. You know, I really enjoy coming to your meetings. I think what you do is extremely important in this largely political process, otherwise dealing with these issues that are so important to those of us who are Delta people and have lived here for a long time, made our livings here, and hope to leave something of value for the people that come after us. And what I really want to urge you today is the importance of the review that you're doing on the environmental stuff in the Delta, because where it all started off with the Stewardship Council, the BDCP was going to take care of all those problems, and they didn't really think they needed to worry too much about it. And I don't think there was that much emphasis put on the environmental issues in the original Delta plan as a result of that. With the collapse of the BDCP, which took place largely because it was found to be, I'm sorry?
We have people under an ex parte rule regarding water fix discussions, so.
Okay. I didn't think I was really going to be talking about water fix, but I was really...
BDCP is close enough.
Okay. But now, you know, we're kind of starting over from scratch again, and the water fix and particularly the eco restore thing were kind of a poor substitute for the breadth of the work that was envisioned under the BDCP, and it was just kind of I would characterize it as let us go ahead and build this project, and we'll figure out how to fund and deal with the problems that are created as a result of it. I mean, I think that's what it was, kind of a de minimis type of an approach at the outset to the issues that we all know are terribly important. I want to just make a light comment here that you guys have just barely got your heads above water on this background, this marvelous background that you have behind you with the Delta scene, which is fabulous. Anyway, that wasn't what I really got up here to talk about. The other thing I would say is that earlier in today's meeting and other meetings, there's always seems to be an emphasis on reviewing the public efforts that are going on to do restoration in the Delta. And they're few and far between, and particularly when you look at them in view of success. I mean, very little has been accomplished over the years other than studying and proposals and so forth, but actual on-the-ground, boots on the ground type stuff there just isn't very much of it. There's what has gone on in many cases has been very unsuccessful. The current thing that's on my mind to talk about is what I would consider to be the failure of the Staten Island experiment, where the state channeled $35 million of public money through 2 bond issues to the Nature Conservancy and passed title to them and then retained a conservation easement where they could make sure that everything went the way it was supposed to, and it's a disaster. The levees are in a poor state. The farming is in a poor state. Subsidence has taken place enormously. All the carbon that's been going into the atmosphere has been calculated now as an enormous thing. And in the process, instead of taking the money that they generated from the farming operations and putting it back into deal with those issues, a review of some of the tax filings of the Nature Conservancy recently has indicated that over $14 million of the net farming revenues were exited from the project into other things that the Nature Conservancy was doing elsewhere. You probably know there's a enormous lawsuit that's just been filed on this subject, and hopefully it'll all come out in the wash. The Twitchell stuff that you looked at this morning, Steve Deverell's efforts out there to try to determine how to rebuild organic soils through the use of wetlands and so forth hasn't really produced much of promise. The efforts to grow rice on Twitchell have been fairly unsuccessful, at least from an economic point of view. But my point is that these kinds of things are taking place in the Delta with quite a large degree of success, but they're largely private. They're not being undertaken by the Department of Fish and Wildlife or so forth. If you really get an opportunity to review some of the successful things that have been going on in terms of wildlife conservation, you could look at Mandeville Island, which privately there's about 3,000 acres that have been turned into a conservation program by a duck hunter. But that benefits not just the duck populations, but all the migratory species that come down through the Delta. They're very significant things that have been done on Brack Track. The Wetlands Conservation Foundation, which Dino Cortopassi has set up, is there and anxious to do demonstration projects and help people understand how to grow rice successfully, how to create wetlands habitat successfully throughout the Delta, and all with private money. There have been some instances of cooperative programs with the federal and the state government where private people can access some money to help convert lands into wetlands and so forth, and those have been successful as well. But don't just look at Sherman Island and Twitchell Island, which are, as you probably know, are in public ownership and have deteriorated rather significantly in spite of spending a lot of money in those areas. Now, I participated quite some years ago in something that the University of California Department of Landscape Architecture sponsored. It was called a charette, and in the Delta. And there's recently been another charette, and I'm going to talk about both of them. The first one was really very interesting. Jay, I don't remember if you were involved in it or not, but it got a lot of people together over in Walnut Grove and spent 2 or 3 days looking at it. And I guess the lady from the Big Break project is not here now. Yeah, but one of the conclusions of that charette process is that you don't want to swim too much upstream on this stuff. That the Sherman Island and these western Delta islands have pretty much been destroyed for agricultural purposes by a deterioration in water quality resulting from the what I will call the over-export, but from the export of fresh water from the Delta. But recognize that what they really are is it's like the Central Park of the Bay Area, that you have all this unspoiled property, like Big Break, like Sherman Island and so forth, available within a short distance of 15 million people or whatever it is that populate this area. And there really are some opportunities to do public education, recreation, and so forth in these areas, rather than trying to, to do things that are really impossible. The new charette process is, I don't know, it's kind of mixed up in my mind with another effort that's going on called the Central Delta Corridor Project, and which is a real misnomer. I mean, there is no such thing as a Central Delta Corridor that involves all of these publicly owned properties that are just happen to be sort of in the Central Delta. But corridors are things in my mind like the Sacramento River corridor that support anadromous fish, flyways, the San Joaquin River corridor, the McCollum-Consumnes River corridor, and so forth. But just to identify a bunch of lands in the middle of the Delta that happen to be either in in NGO or public ownership doesn't identify them appropriately. The other thing that the effort seems to be to try to sort of make a silk purse out of a sow's ear in that situation, where the people that are interested in doing that are really trying to figure out how to compensate for the fishery losses. But when you look at the properties that are involved there, it's really, the ecosystem is an avian ecosystem. It's not a fish system, or at least one that lends itself easily to recreating habitat that would be amenable to the fish populations that are in danger. So getting back to what I started to say, I think your review of the ecosystem stuff in the Delta Plan is going to be critical to try to get the focus where it ought to be, try to protect the ecosystem as it exists or could exist in the area, and get rid of all of the static and the fuzzy stuff that's going on, more related to the water export projects. Again, I want to thank you. I'm sorry I took more time than I would ordinarily take, but I've been off on a field trip. I'm just tireless in my efforts to try to understand all these issues, so I voluntarily went to Scotland for 3 weeks where they have a lot of peat soils, up there, and I did a lot of walking over those areas with golf clubs in my hand. So anyway, thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone have any questions, comments?
Tom, I had a question for you. I noticed in one of the science program activities is a salinity symposium for aquatic ecosystems. I know there's some controversies on the salinity effects on agriculture in the Delta, and I'm wondering what your thought is of would a parallel symposium on salinity effects on agriculture be good? Maybe I should wait just a moment until.
Well, I do have a lot of opinions on that. Most of the experimentation and the data that's been applied to the subject of salinity in the Delta comes out of the UC Riverside lab down there. They have a soil salinity laboratory study down there. A fellow named Dr. Hoffman has been the primary spokesperson for that recently. The problem is that you can't extrapolate from the way those studies were done down there in soils that are mineral soils and readily leachable and so forth to the organic soil situations in the Delta. And if you can envision this for a moment, if you drive down the San Joaquin Valley, you'll see a lot of top irrigation taking place, and you'll see a lot of drainage and so forth. If you go out into the Delta, typically and historically, the land has all been sub-irrigated because the water table is just 2 or 3 feet or 4 feet below the surface of these organic soils. And so the way the irrigation has taken place is the water is siphoned by gravity from the river channels into irrigation ditches, which are high ditches, which distribute the water into V ditches, which go into little spud ditches, and they when they want to irrigate, they bring the water table up to the surface. Well, it's a very efficient way of irrigating because you don't get a lot of surface evaporation and so forth. But what you get is a lot of accumulation of salt in the top 6 inches of the soil. And it's very difficult to get rid of. So when somebody says that, well, you can irrigate with water of 0.9 EC and so forth and so on, they don't really know what they're talking about when you're applying that to most of the areas in the delta, which are not susceptible to this concept of over-irrigation, which you do with saltier water and you're continuously washing the salts out of the soil into the sub-drainage. Now, that's probably a longer answer than you wanted.
No, it's not quite long. It's long enough to identify what might be some different mechanisms for salt flushing than what is normally applied in most of the rest of California and elsewhere. But I'm wondering, particularly as you mentioned a couple of times today, the salinization of agricultural soils in the Western Delta, if that merits some particular examination, because the Hoffman studies, you're right, are the ones that dominate these discussions, and certainly in the work I've been involved with peripherally, that's what we've been used, because there's really an absence. I'm not aware of any other work that has looked at salinization.
Oh, yeah,
as
Terry
Western.
Pritchard, do you know Terry? He's associated with the UC Extension Service and was at Davis for, I don't know.
I think he's retired sometime.
He's retired now. He was, and originally there was a guy named Nelson in Stockton, at Nelson Laboratories, who was the real, but he's long gone now. But it just, it's unfortunate. It's not that these opinions or whatever are not expressed. It's just that it's hard to get anybody to look at them because it's kind of running against the grain, of the need to export more water out of the Delta.
I know the current extension specialist for the Delta, Michelle Leinfelder-Miles, is interested in some of this.
Well, I hope so. I'm kind of on my way out of this process, through deterioration and old age. But
Right.
So I'm not as familiar with the current people involved in it as I once was.
But it struck me as I saw this symposium on salinization of aquatic ecosystems that it might be useful to have a parallel to that occur at some point to look at salinization of the agronomic ecosystems in the Western Delta.
Yeah. Well, we could make presentations to you on how salts are actually handled in the organic soils and what you have to do in order to maintain a healthy soil profile. That would be easy to organize and present.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Oh, I think we raised some more questions.
Tom, I want to thank you for bringing up the charette process. It's something that, we tend to think of the Science Enterprise Workshop, the big approaches to use, and there's a lot of things like that especially for interdisciplinary, where you want to bring a lot of people in, where you want to bring in students and the public, and it's a very, very interesting process. It doesn't always work, but it's not something that a lot of people are aware of, but it's widely used by landscape architects.
Well, for cross-disciplinary approaches, it's really good.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you don't end up with just one discipline looking at something. You're trying to put it all together. I think it's excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Berkeley did a great job on that.
Tom, go ahead.
Tom, I just had a quick question. You mentioned the private efforts being successful. How do you define successful? What would be the performance measure?
Well, most of these people have a specific purpose in mind when they do it, duck hunting. And it's hard to define, success in that effort. But if you talk to any of the wildlife biologists that are, that are interested in the bird life in the Delta, and they've done I can give you a quick example of it. Back in 1991, I think it was, after we were coming out of a drought, and there was a water bank proposal put together in the Delta that, as a result of that, where they got people, they paid them to go out and fallow land so they wouldn't be irrigating lands in the Delta, and hopefully there'd be more water in the system to repulse salinity and to protect the export pumps. You can't actually sell riparian water because it has to be used on the land to which it's riparian, but they were in effect paying people not to use their water with the idea that it would then be available for somebody else. Well, as a result of that, there were a lot of weeds that ended up growing and one thing or another because you got these shallow water tables, and it really didn't appear to be all that effective. So we did another effort in the next year, which was called a crop shift program. And instead of not farming the land, we converted land to crops that wouldn't be irrigated during the times when the delta is in balance, which is basically the late spring and in the summer. And those are winter wheat crops and barley and things like that. It was a terrific success, and one of the things that Fish and Game at the time, now Fish and Wildlife, wanted to do was to leave a certain amount of the crops unharvested so that there would be adequate feed for the migratory birds and stuff that were going through. And that was, they largely said, okay, you go ahead and grow the barley or the wheat, but the cornfield that's adjacent here, we want you to leave 10% of the crop standing, something like that. And this is a long background to point out that they did the surveys year to year and found that there were more usage by migratory birds in the year of the crop shift program than there had been normally and in the water bank program. So there are things that you can do like that are demonstrable, to help the species along, and it's not too hard to study them. And that was one instance where they did.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, but 50 years of working on these issues, you compile a lot of cobwebs and things.
As long as you still keep informative, we'll let you talk.
You're speaking for the many today.
All right, the next item we'll move on to is number 7, which is to talk about the ecosystems review. And I want to break that up into 2 sections. One, to talk specifically about the prospectus, and then secondly, talk about the workshop. Now, that work group is Dick, Joy, John, and myself. And I'll go through the prospectus first and then ask them to make any further comments. What we want to do is to see if there's consensus to adopt this as our formal prospectus by the end of today. We did an original prospectus that went out for public comment. We got 4 public comments, and all of them very valuable public comments. Greg Zoltnik, okay, from the San Juan, I'll go through these individually actually. You should have in your packet a copy of a tracked change version of our prospectus and the changes that we made in response to the comments. And I think I can say we've actually did some changes for most of the comments, and some of the other comments were things that we felt were already in the document and maybe just not clarified as much. I think overall there was a couple of the reviewers thought that it was too narrowly focused on non-native species, and we should expand to consider, of course, native species and ecosystems and novel ecosystems. Our view was that that is what our intent was overall, to look at it from an ecosystem perspective and the impact of non-natives. But we thought that the The title was, didn't reflect that. It clearly didn't reflect it to the people that were reading it, where we had originally had said the science of non-native species, and that might have sort of signaled that that's all we were going to talk about. So we changed the title. Now it's roles and impacts of non-native species in a dynamic delta. And then we also moved, the first sentence now clearly states that we are broadening the whole concept of what we're looking at to look at the consequences of species shifts in and out of delta lands and waters. So we think in other places we've made those changes as well to reflect that our intent really is a broad intent. I'll go through each of the reviewers now just very briefly and point out how we changed some of the prospectus to reflect their comments and ones that we agreed on. First, Greg's review from the Sandwater Water District, his first comment was had to do with changing the title and the broaden it, which we did, and our intent is to look at the ecosystem response to non-natives, so we made that more clear throughout. The one suggestion he made is we should consider the concept of reconciliation. We've discussed this before in some of our other reviews and decided that we'd prefer to stick with the term restoration to be consistent with the two equal goals. And so we left that as restoration. There's a comment on the opening paragraph of the review. It seems that the same information would apply to native species as well. In some of the bulleted points we had, we agree, and we think that that's exactly what it does say. Number 3, he suggested in number 3 we should consider climate change, but we do include climate change now included in number 4 in our bullet points. And then the suggestion also was to change the title and then also maybe consider climate change explicitly. The climate change is part of this in the context of a dynamic delta is part of that's the way we referred that, as well as in one of our bullets. But climate change per se in the title is something we've thought about considering at a later date as a topic in and of itself. There was a comment from Michael Brodsky from the Law Office of Michael A. Brodsky, largely having to do with the idea that specifically on the striped bass, and that when do you consider a non-native species a native species, and when do you and also do you consider that some non-native species have economic benefit? And we have included a phrase now to consider the management of non-native species that have now been accepted into the ecosystem. We also talk about phrases that there may be benefits to non-natives, and also talk about, in essence, the concept of when a species, non-native species, is considered to be quote-unquote native or part of a new ecosystem, like a novel ecosystem. So we believe we've responded to that. The next public comment was from Margaret Stone from the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District. Again, the comment about having a title reflected, we're going to go beyond non-native species. That was their primary comment. And so we did change the title as suggested. There was a suggestion that we discuss more of the management options available to control invasive species and the effectiveness of these techniques and so forth. And we will be looking at the science of these topics, but not necessarily the management options specifically related to those. And again, another suggestion that we look more directly at non-native species as ecological engineers, altering habitat and so forth. We did add text to reflect that non-natives might have impacts on habitat structure to reflect that. There was a comment about assisted migration, but assisted migration was a component in item number 6 that we had already included in the prospectus. The last comment was by Peter Moyle, who suggested we define our terms early, and there was some more comment about the use of the word invasives. He also suggested a new term, which we chose not to use yet. We figured we'll deal with new terms once we start writing our review. So we were even far more careful in how we used the term invasive. I think we only have it used once, and then with the parentheses that if deemed harmful, then they're invasive. he suggested we specifically look at the concept of novel ecosystems. We've talked about novel ecosystems a lot in the group, and that is a term that has various meanings and some controversy, so we just put in the term, we spelled it out in terms of a concept, but we used the word novel assemblages just to realize that we are going to be talking about those things, but we didn't want to highlight that term yet in the prospectus. And then he also talked about the concept of non-native and when do you stop controlling non-natives, basically, and we added some text under bullet number 1 that addressed that particular topic. So all in all, I think we're happy to get those comments. A lot of them we think really helped improve our focus, and at least improved our terminology so that we actually were saying what we meant to say, and hopefully people would understand it that way. And I'm going to ask Dick first, and then we'll go to John and Joy if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I felt the public comments were all constructive, complimentary. In many ways, it was things we were definitely already thinking about, and all we needed to do was just make sure we're communicating appropriately to our audience, and that's what we tried to do in the second round.
John?
Yeah, it's kind of hard listening to people put the static on this. I think you've done a good job of summarizing how we responded to things. We need to keep in mind that this is, after all, a prospectus, and it's not a binding contract on what we are going to look at and what we are not going to look at. So I think we can go overboard in taking it a little bit too seriously. That said, I would like to point out on the top line of the second page, the red line part talks about even benefiting certain stakeholders, e.g. striped bass, and that reads as if the striped bass are the stakeholders, and I don't think that was what was intended. I couldn't resist editorializing on that. Otherwise, I think it's good to go. I think that I've called attention before to the notion that it's been expressed that some of these non-natives that have become integral parts of the system or have socioeconomic values could be regarded as guest species. They're guests who basically came to stay, and maybe they've overstayed their welcome, but maybe they haven't. So there are ways of thinking about them that gets away from some of the native, non-native kind of dichotomies. But that's something we can come to later on. I think it's in good shape and set to go.
Thanks, John. Joy?
Yes, I agree. It is a great job. Thanks so much. I saw those comments as indicative of wide-ranging interest in the topic, so I'm looking forward to working on the review and having continued interest in the topic.
Okay, anything, Tom?
Yeah, I was quite content with it before the conference. And one of the talks at the conference that I found really disturbing was the discussion of the threat posed by the nutria that are starting to show up. And I mean, if it gets as bad as it looks like it could be without any ratification, management is going to be a big issue for that. And it seemed to me it might be worthwhile thinking about that, including some reference to that in the report. Not necessarily the nutria, but the management aspect. Because when they do get real bad, you don't have a lot of time to respond.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if we, the management, specific public comment related to management of control, which I guess that is, part of it. And again,
Yeah.
so are you thinking we talk specifically about the management or the science of how you manage? Because I saw that same
Well, I'm
talk.
not familiar with the terminology, but it's clearly some kind of control thing, and I assumed when they were talking about management that that's sort of what they were talking about.
Yeah, Vance?
I had a similar concern, and not having heard that talk, but, you know, it's a review of the science, but it's presumably going to review what the management is based on in terms of science or not based on in terms of science. So I think you're going to cover that even without explicitly saying it in the prospectus. It's going to be obvious that you're going to look at what's done in the Delta in terms of management, and does the science support that or not support it. Nutria actually is quite good to eat, and that could be the saving grace, you know, if they eat it all throughout Europe.
Well, it sounded like there were going to be 250,000 of those varmints running around, so plenty of food.
The solution to pollution is digestion.
Yeah, I think you're right. We would cover. I'm just trying to see looking for words that we said that would have already covered that. Because in my mind, I think we would be doing that. So.
Add it with the striped bass.
Oh, Steve?
Yes.
I was wondering if this statement covers it on line 38, what approaches to control non-native species are effective or feasible. So it kind of covers the control aspect.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go ahead and do that. Well, any other comments on that? So, Tom, you had a public comment on, was that on this particular item, or? You're done, okay. Okay, without objection, then, I mean, I see one change, adding management into, on line 38 and 39, and then John's correction on the striped bass. With that, are we ready to accept this as a go?
I so move.
Okay, any objection? Okay, then let's go ahead and, well, I've already made those comments. Give them to Edmund, and we can get them out on our product thing.
Yes, it'll be up as early as next week.
All right, good. The next item is the workshop, and if you had read the revision carefully, the first version of the prospectus had us doing 2 specific workshops. What we've decided to do in this one is we've actually modified that and said we will do some workshops, and weren't very specific about it because we didn't want to be too prescriptive, mainly because trying to get people to come and with certain talents at different times has been a bit of a challenge. Edmund, can we go ahead and talk about the scheduling right now?
Yes, we can, in the context of the workshop, yes.
Okay, so our original workshop was scheduled for November. Now, we have 3 of our board members who couldn't make the face-to-face meeting in November. We also had 1 out of the 4 main panelists we were thinking about also couldn't make it in November. It's my understanding that all of the 4 panelists and all of our 10 board members can make the December 6th, which was a conference call, if we made that a face-to-face. So I'd like to propose that, that we just move have a teleconference in November and have our face-to-face all day on December 6th.
One day or 2 days?
The thought, well, that's open for discussion, but the idea was that we would have the panel on the afternoon of the 6th. I know that Tom has a conflict in the afternoon of the 7th, and Jay has a class sometime on the 7th as well. Morning of the 7th. So we thought all day on the 6th, and then if on the 7th, if people want to have work group meetings, they can go ahead and do that. Or if we want to have the new contractors come in, for example, for monitoring on the morning of the 7th or something, then we would have enough people to meet with them.
What day will the November call be?
I'm going to suggest November 1st because there were certain people that couldn't make the 2nd.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to work closely with Tom and Vince to see when's the best time if they're available for a conference call. And I think Liz too. So I think we'll send out final plans after the meeting on the exact time and date.
Okay, so likely the morning or so of November 1st. And then the face-to-face will be all day on the 6th. So, and we're going to try and we have 4 panelists more or less confirmed. So if Edmund, you'll confirm those dates with them because they're looking at 2 dates. And I think John was going to contact one other panelist to add to that and see if who couldn't make it on the 1st, who can now make it on December 6th. So we'd have 5 panelists or 4 if they can't make it.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, go ahead.
You didn't respond to my email asking which one of those earlier panelists you wanted me to invite first. If you just email me your suggestion, I'll go ahead and do that.
I was going to, since you put the original invites out, I was just going to let you make that decision. Just pick out the number one person. I think we had sort of a prioritized list.
Yeah, we didn't have a prioritized list among the set of initial invitees, as far as I could tell. Well, we can take this up offline.
Yeah, why don't you send an email to the work group and then see if we can come up with a name in the next, hopefully, in the next day or so.
Then
so
I'll be happy to go ahead and re-invite.
Sounds good.
Thank you, John.
Okay, any other comment on this? Questions? And we have one public comment.
I was just wondering, on December 6th, where this conference would be.
It'll be in Sacramento at the, what's the name of the building? Stewardship Council? Park Tower?
Okay, thank you.
In the afternoon. And we'll also always be available online and on video. Yeah. Okay, the next item is to reflect on the, is item number 8, to reflect on the Bay Delta Science Conference. If you recall, after each one of these, we generally write a letter to the conference organizers, expressing our opinion, making suggestions, and so forth. I think in your packet is our letter from the 2016 letter that we wrote. I also looked at the 2014 letter. They look pretty much the same with high praise and some very specific things. Five of the board members were there for the entire conference, I believe. So people want to express some of their general thoughts or things we would like to make recommendations on? Tom?
I thought one thing we might change in the letter is I just attended a lot of talks that dealt with modeling and predictions. And I remember at the IEP workshop, it was really focused on monitoring, and there wasn't a lot of the predictive aspect. And I think it's definitely good that you saw a lot of those efforts to predict.
Jay, you were saying something about synthesis.
Yeah, one of the things that I think we had a little bit more of maybe in the previous years, and maybe I just missed them, the sessions this year, were panels of people that were doing work in a field that were sort of doing a synthesis, not just saying, here, let me tell you about my research, but here's what we think about where the research is saying that's new and where it ought to be going. I think some more emphasis on that. Maybe for each track, there will be a panel discussion at the end of the day or something on those different subjects. Maybe setting up for a white paper in some cases might be useful.
Okay, yeah.
And that would be sort of a policy-friendly, decision-maker-friendly kind of things too, I would think might be useful for managers.
Yeah, I think overall the conferences, I've been only to the last 3, but this one seemed to me to be the best of all. I don't know, because it just seemed to be a lot of really, really good presentations all the way through it. They also had the plenary included social science and communication, which I think we ought to point out. And there just also seemed to be a lot of really smart students running around. And in the student mentor session and just in the poster sessions and even presentations. And it's almost like, shouldn't say this, almost like, get out of here, old man, it's time to get the work done, you know, and they were really sharp. Dick?
Yeah, I think our letter definitely needs to emphasize that it's yet another great conference. I'd like to emphasize that there was more social science than ever before, and literally, I mean, cumulative, all past years, more this time than ever before, and that's excellent. The plenary on science communication, I thought went well. But I guess I would also add to Jay's comment that I felt there was a fair number of presentations, maybe it was all those smart students, who were presenting how they did their science. And if we could convert some of that time into fewer arrays of numbers on screens, which nobody can read, into what's it all mean? How does it fit with other people's research? How do they connect with other parts of the science program? We could sort of suggest that more scientists take that initiative themselves, that it be a part of a presentation. That it's not just here's what I did, but here's what it means and how it fits.
Tracy, do you have any?
I was going to comment on Dick's comment. I think you're right. That's what I want to hear when I go there, but I think it's also really important for a lot of the earlier in career scientists to have that opportunity to present their sort of science package and get the feedback on what they did and why they did it. But I think in general, I think in the past, we've suggested that people should try to say, what does the science mean? I think that's always a good thing to say, but I've always wanted to cut, especially early career scientists, some slack to just get up there and talk about and get critiqued about what they did and how they did it. So I think it's a mix. But overall, I thought I was there for probably 2/3 of the conference. I had to duck out a few times, but I thought it was definitely well run, logistics worked well. I talked to a few people that have been working on it. They said it was really a scramble to get things pulled off, but they actually did a really good job. I read our comments from the last 2016 conference. There's a few things like the social science emphasis that Dick brought up is good to emphasize, but I think what we said 2 years ago, we could still say today for the most part. So I don't think we should spend too much time. The one thing we said 2 years ago that I think it said that we should ask people to try to address the theme of the conference more. And I always find that you come up with a theme for a conference just so you have something to put on the flyer, but you don't really care that much. I mean, you shouldn't. I mean, the theme should be, what does my science mean to the Delta? Or what does this science mean to the Delta? Trying to say everybody should put intersections into their talk is like,
more titles with crossroads than
I know there was a lot, and I was looking at that, and then I looked at our comments, and I thought, well, are they doing that because we suggested it? Because it's like you're stretching. That's just like, just get up and talk about your science and what it means. So, I would take that comment out that you should try to address the theme of the conference. Because themes are always the conference committee spend way too much time trying to define a theme, and it's contrived. You don't really care. I mean, yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, we also suggested last time that additional guides to poster presentation. I think they had that. They had the charts all over the place and on how to find posters and stuff, which I found.
They had a map that was pretty useful. I found, at least in finding my student posters to judge, it was easy.
We also said statement of broader impacts. That kind of sort of relates to what Jay's talking about in terms of synthesis, maybe not quite the same. And we said more science policy discussions. And I think the session that John ran was a good sort of science policy open dialogue.
That was the only panel at the whole conference.
Yeah.
That seemed unusual that it was fewer than what I recall in the past. The conference, I think, is phenomenally successful. I mean, it really is an excellent conference, one of the best around. And there's a lot of just tremendously useful discussions that happen in the hallways and over lunch and over the posters, and all that is just great. But it might be useful to try to develop little forums around particular issues that, since you have all those people gathered up, get them,
That's a good suggestion.
have an hour. Maybe it's over a poster session where we're going to have these little interest groups get together on different topics and talk about something for a little bit. And maybe sometimes it's a panel discussion that's out in public, but it's just, while you have all those really smart people together, it's nice to get as much out of it as you can.
I think turnout at the student lunch was the biggest I've ever seen.
It was crowded. Yeah.
That was good. I thought really successful. The other thing I think you all pointed out, the plenary, so that, the addition of the social scientists on the plenary and the communication was something that the program organizers thought a lot about, and really, I think it was, it was a first. And so I think if you guys feel that was successful, I thought it was, but I think if you guys feel it's successful, you should make that clear so that they get that message.
One thing I noticed at this one that it seemed that it was more common than I've seen in the past, and not just BDSC, but other science conferences. It seemed like there were a lot more slides that people put up where you absolutely could not read the information.
Yeah.
And it just seemed that was more prevalent this time. And again, you take people on their faith and say, well, these data, you can't see it, but it shows this. But maybe some way of just having a few people that sit in on some of the sessions and just basically give a real quick critique as to whether these slides were effective or not, or were legible, were
You can
usable.
have a random inquisitor.
Yeah, the Inquisition, yeah.
They had guidelines that
Yeah,
went out to the speakers that encouraged them to use big font and make sure it's readable. And
I know. I'm just maybe
if they went to
some
the
feedback.
science communication workshop. They
Yeah, maybe so. Of course,
Yeah.
some of my slides were illegible too. I know that. So. But I knew that going in. So.
Okay, well, what I'd suggest is that each of you who commented and were at the conference, send me a couple of lines related to what you just said here. And Edmund and I Edmund underline and I in parentheses, can put a first draft of that together and then just get it back to, probably just to the ones that were at the conference, I think, and then we'll go ahead and get it out.
So I assume like an ASAP deadline for the participants.
Pardon?
Everyone sends comments ASAP.
Yeah. A day or two. Yeah, just a couple of lines, just to key phrasing and stuff like that.
I think it's ASAC, as soon as convenient.
Okay, anything else on that item? All right, I think we're going to get done early today. Next one is preparation for upcoming Delta meetings. So October, we have a conference call. Now, what I have here is that's when we'll get the overview of the Delta Science Plan, but that's not the time, or?
So I think it's going to be up in the air still, but it could be October or November. But the idea is that there may be an update in early October, but you won't get the science plan until like later in October, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll see what the comments are. The comments will come September 20th, and I think depending on the extent of the comments, I think we'll have a better idea of how they will be addressed.
Yeah. So you don't have to write down exact dates at this time.
Okay, and then our next conference call is November 1st, and I would, since that's probably only going to be an hour or two, I would, unless we have that presentation, just strongly suggest that the work groups keep meeting and working together so we can, by the time December rolls around, we can have some pretty good progress reports on where we're at with the various reviews. That's all I have and I know in January we'll be meeting again in person, and that'll be a 2-day meeting, I believe, because one full day of that on the 10th will be the water supply reliability, and I believe there's also what was the other water quality panel is tentatively signed for that on the 11th, but that's still very tentative. I'm looking at Tracy.
Water quality panel?
It's Jay's. It's the water supply reliability, isn't it?
I think the water quality panel to talk about the recommendations.
Yeah, that was.
Oh,
Was that going to be at the ISB meeting, or was that going to be just a separate
It'll-
discussion?
It was going to be ISB, I think.
I think it'll be like
okay.
separate, but it'll be part
Okay.
of the ISB meeting,
Okay,
so the Delta
right.
Science program would help host it.
Okay,
Okay.
pardon my confusion. It happens a lot.
And we tentatively had, for the November meeting, a field trip to Rush Ranch, but if we're postponing to December, given the scheduling, I don't think that will happen.
Yeah, that's correct. I think we'll probably postpone it until next year.
And the other thing we've sort of tried to lock into is at the end of the IEP meeting, we'd have our regular March meeting. The day after that, that's when the invasives, not invasive, non-native review would also have more specific panel for that day, where we bring in some other people and have a second workshop that might be more focused specifically on critters or issues related to the Delta itself. So rather than the more broad issues in our December workshop. Anything else on the agenda? Edmund?
I think you covered the main points.
Dates for the IEP in March yet?
They do.
5 to 7.
March 5th to 7th.
Okay, I think we're to item number 10, review of follow-up items. Edmund?
So I have a few for John Calloway. So John will send articles that have been published on Twitchell Island. The ISB will expect the Delta Science Plan in either October or November. It's still up in the air. The ISB individually can start thinking about whether they would like to take the lead. I think there was a suggestion maybe the chair should take the lead on it.
No, that wasn't an action item.
Okay. For John, I also have that he'll send out the PSN to the ISB that went out in case you didn't see it on the listserv. And then you guys are encouraged to send it out to your colleagues who may be interested. And the PSN closes on October 26th. When NCR presentations are posted online, we'll notify you guys that it's available and you can watch the presentations. As a heads up, I had mic issues, so you probably can't hear me on my presentation. John will also send 2 of the Delta Lead Scientist articles that he discussed today. In terms of summary sheets, fish and flows and water quality are in progress, and Kat is making good progress on fish and flows, so hopefully that will be done soon. For water supply reliability, Jay should have a pre-workshop survey done today. Okay, thank you. So cross off the list. For IEP, the work group is all going to continue to summarize and bin information from the questionnaire, interviews, and the brown bag /seminar. The work group, or Vin specifically, will follow up with the Delta ISB chairship on how exactly to share the IEP questionnaire data, because there's a lot of requests about it. For the ecosystems prospectus, today you guys accepted the track changes with 2 additional edits on line 38 to 40. For the approaches, we'll change what approaches to control non-native species are effective or feasible for management. And then on lines 43 and 44, we'll make an edit to make sure striped bass isn't seen as a certain stakeholder. And we'll run that by John before we post it.
I'm not sure we ought to change that.
Today, we also agreed to change the November in-person meeting to a teleconference and the December meeting to an in-person meeting. This is to accommodate some members who cannot make the November meeting. We will be working to schedule the exact date and time for the November teleconference to make sure everyone can participate. For the December meeting, there will be the ecosystems workshop. Panelists have been nailed down, but we're still missing one more. John Weens will send an email to the work group to finalize that final panelist. In terms of reflecting on the Bay Delta Science Conference, all ISB members who attended the workshop should send comments to Steve and myself on what they want to include in the letter, and then we'll draft the letter for that small group who attended before submitting it off to the conference organizers. And then in terms of the future meetings, we're going to cancel our Sassoon Marsh trip in November, and I think we pretty much went over, and we'll include it in the notes, but in January is going to be the water supply reliability workshop, and we'll have something for the water quality review. And those are the major ones I've highlighted. I'll probably I'll probably find a few more when I draft up the notes to send out. Did I miss anything major that anyone would like to mention?
Okay. Tom, any public comments and anything not on the agenda?
Yeah, we're quick.
And the unanimous applause.
Yeah. I want to add thank you to Edmund and to Kat. Without Darcy, they're leading the show now, so thank you guys.
Doing a great job.
Continuing to do a great job.
All right, thanks everyone. The meeting's adjourned.